I knew that as soon as I was old enough to know that superhero was not an occupational specialty that you could actually really follow, I knew that I wanted to serve my country or my community because I felt like that service could get me as close to what a superhero would feel like. And I'm talking about I'm a 5 or 6 or 7 year old boy. It was that calling and that attraction that this profession has allowed me and so many others to fulfill.
Sheriff Dennis Lemma, welcome to the podcast. It's been a long time coming, so I'm glad we finally got you here on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Mike, and it's great seeing you. Although virtually, it's great to be with you.
And I got to give a big shout out to your main man, Brian Bear. I mean, he's your chief of staff. I'm sure he does lots of things around that organization. He was on me about trying to coordinate schedules, so I was feeling the pressure from Brian to make this happen, and so I'll just give Brian a big shout out because I know he does so much for you, but he helped me. He helped make this possible as well. Now, Sheriff, you're on your third term, and I note that because I think you were reelected in 2024, if I have that right, and you ran unopposed. I mean, that certainly says something about being the chief law enforcement officer in Seminole County, Florida, and your popularity with your constituents that you ran unopposed, and you're on your third term there.
Yeah, Mike, it's third term as sheriff, and June makes my 34th year here at the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. And although I'd love to take credit that going unopposed is a reflection of me, I really think it's a reflection of the norm, values, and customs that have been established by the hardworking, dedicated, professional men and women of the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. And that's what's incredibly unique as the elected leader of a policing organization. We really benefit from the services that our citizens come most directly in contact with, and that's the patrol deputies and the investigators and the dispatchers and the correctional staff that are on that front line. They're the people that are closest to the problem, and I'm incredibly proud of the work that they do.
Now, you are a Florida sheriff, and I believe you're the president of the Florida Sheriff's Association right now. You were formerly the president of the Major County Sheriffs of America, so you're involved in, state associations and national associations having a large impact beyond Seminole County. But in Florida, there are very colorful sheriffs, and you are sort of even kill about this. I'm just curious, like how how do you deal with your counterparts in Florida who have YouTube followings that are just insane? And we're talking about Sheriff Grady Judd in Polk County, but there are others. Like, how do you deal with your fellow sheriffs in Florida when they're so colorful sometimes?
What's interesting is the sheriff has to represent the norms and expectations of the communities that they serve. And I say all the
Hmm.
time, not only to my friend Grady Judd, who actually I was just on the phone with him for a little over an hour this morning, talking about the Florida landscape and criminal justice, incredibly great mentor to me and many other sheriffs across the country. But it's really staying connected with what the expectations are of your individual county and community. And for here in Seminole County, there's an expectation of making the actions kind of serve as the case in point, to make sure that we kind of
Hmm.
embrace a concept that focuses on the underlying conditions that lead people down the path to commit crime in the first place. And that's just not with me. It was with my mentor and predecessor, Sheriff Don Esslinger, and the sheriffs who had served before him. But again, I'm fortunate enough to come in as the former chief deputy of Don Esslinger, who had served as sheriff for 26 years. So the norms and the expectations of our community was you know less flamboyant, let's call it, than what is occurring in many other areas, not only here in the state of Florida but across the country. We've got 67 counties in Florida and 67 different personalities. None more
Yeah.
right than wrong, but it's just different.
Now, Sheriff, one thing you started you mentioned you were chief deputy to the prior sheriff. You started as a correctional officer, and you worked your way up, and I think you probably held just about every position in the sheriff's office. How has that affected sort of beginning as a correctional officer and moving all the way up to sheriff? How does that affect your leadership today and how you think about running the organization?
I tell you, Mike, it is probably one of the greatest advantages I have as serving as sheriff here. I feel like that this is my home. This is the place where I've learned about not only policing, but I learned about life through the various positions and ranks within the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. And over again, June is 34 years, and I started working as a correctional officer, and became a part of that kind of environment, and absolutely loved working in that space, and became a deputy sheriff, a detective, a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain, a major, and chief deputy before becoming the 10th sheriff in our history. And I say, really half joking sometimes, I spent long enough in each one of those ranks and positions to know what it feels like to have good, solid, effective leadership. And on other times, I remember if I had greater control, if I ever was given the opportunity to ascend to a higher ranking position, what would I do to make things better, to implement change? And there's not a day that goes by in this particular role that I don't reflect back on those times that I had from sitting in those seats and being empowered and wanting to make change and wanting to make a difference. The other benefit to that is I learned firsthand enough about those particular disciplines not to become an expert in any one of them, but to recognize the hardworking, dedicated professionals that have invested their entire career with working in that space. I'm talking about the homicide investigator that says, you know what, I want to work homicides for the next 25 years. And I typically will go to them when I'm brainstorming, wanting to get some feedback to implement change or a new direction. So it is probably single-handedly the greatest advantage that I have as serving as sheriff here is this is my home. This is my family.
Yeah, and been there, done that. I mean, and I again just go back as starting as a correctional officer. I'm sure that carries a lot of weight that they know you've walked in their shoes in the facility and you understand their concerns all the way up to working up through the various ranks. But you also came into this. You're a Marine. Thank you for your service. I'm sure that heavily influences how you think about leadership and also how that influenced the direction you took. As you climbed the ranks within the sheriff's department before being elected.
It's difficult because the Marine Corps is not civilian policing, and what we do and the acceptable norms and customs in the United States Marine Corps absolutely has shaped my philosophy on life and leadership. But at the same time,
Mhm.
when we had MPs in the Marine Corps, whether you were a field or garrison MP, the policing of community policing and what we do here is really entirely different. But what I try to do as often as I can is hire military veterans. I hire military
Yeah.
veterans because they know what it takes to kind of go through process and procedure. And Mike, one of my favorite commercials, and for a Marine to say one of his favorite advertising recruiting commercials is actually an Army commercial. And I think it was for like
Oh
the Army
boy.
National Guard, where they had a bunch of soldiers in the back of a C-130, and they were trying to promote the benefits that military service offers occupationally further down the path. And it said, next time you're at a job interview and your panel or your supervisor asks you what kind of leadership training experience you have, try not to smile. And it has these soldiers jumping out of the back of a C-130, parachuting what would appear to be some combat zone. The leadership traits that are taught in the military
Mhm.
are so important to the fundamental aspect of life and leadership that you can't turn a blind eye to it. But even before that, Mike, I knew that as soon as I was old enough to know that superhero was not an occupational specialty that you could actually really follow, I knew that I wanted to serve my country or my community because I felt like that service could get me as close to what a superhero would feel like And I'm talking about I'm a 5 or 6 or 7 year old boy. It was that calling and that attraction that this profession has allowed me and so many others to fulfill.
Amazing. I love that analogy about, wanting to be a superhero, and there's a path to being a superhero. Like, you can go in terms of public service and going into public safety, and choose a variety of different paths, or serving in the military. I love that. Now, but you do know that we're going to hear from Marines that your favorite commercials from the Army, and maybe even the Army National Guard.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we're
look,
prepared for
I
that in the
love the
comments.
Army,
I'm sure you're
Mike.
going to hear it from your fellow
Look,
Marines.
the Army is wonderful. There always has to be a second best, and I would imagine Army is probably in competition for second best to the United States Marine Corps.
I think you just said I think you just cleared it up right there.
Yeah, thank
Now,
you.
you've had you've had obviously a major impact in Seminole County around opioid abuse, substance abuse is something you're passionate about. But given the platforms that you've had, like as president of the Major County Sheriffs of America, and certainly now as the president of the Florida Sheriff's Association, I mean, I know you're passionate about that subject. You're passionate about making a difference in communities. So maybe talk a little bit about how that came about, some of the things that you've done, and where are you seeing us making progress on that front, and where we need to go to continue to make progress.
So Mike, I'll start by saying, one of the greatest responsibilities of a civilized society is to protect and preserve human life. And when we saw overprescribing of opioids occurring across the country, we in policing and the medical community and the addiction specialists knew that we had a problem. Most of us were raised with the words of wisdom that Nancy Reagan taught us to say no to drugs. And saying no works incredibly
Hmm.
well if you've never been started through a legal prescription of an opioid. Um, and when you look at the
Hmm.
chemical makeup and formula of that, it becomes nothing but pure heroin if misused, or the human body builds up a sustainability to a prolonged use of some type of narcotic, especially something as strong as an opioid. So now it's not uncommon for people to know
Hmm.
the story of Purdue Pharmaceutical and Richard Sackler and the overprescribing and the FDA move. But I was really thrusted in by the leadership at the time of former Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody, now Senator Ashley Moody. When she was
Hmm.
in the works of a transition between herself and Pam Bondi, her successor or predecessor, she had asked me to serve on her transition team, and then asked me to specifically take on the opioid you know, casualties that were occurring across the state of Florida. At the time, it was 17 people a day in Florida that were dying of an opioid related overdose. And so I worked with her over a handful of months to put together a white paper. And then ultimately, it was that white paper that Governor Ron DeSantis, upon taking office, implemented a statewide working group on opioid abuse and misuse, and designated Ashley Moody as the chair, and I served as the vice chair. And then ultimately, collaterally, I ended up working for Casey DeSantis, our first lady here in the state of Florida, to put together a drug abuse prevention panel because she was incredibly mindful of the harms, particularly as it related to young kids. So kind of thrusting
Hmm.
in that, and then building this public-private partnership with Advent Health, one of the largest healthcare providers here in the southeastern part of the United States. They're in nine states. They have just been so incredibly generous, and then working with the late David Siegel with the Victoria's Voice Foundation, who lost his 18-year-old daughter to a drug overdose. It was David's advocacy that brought an opioid antagonist into the mainstream accessibility for policing professionals. Once he found out that if the deputies that responded to her tragic death would have been equipped with that, they may have had an opportunity to save her. So over the years, we've done great work. Former DEA Administrator Ann Milgram and I worked very closely together. But I will tell you, Mike, with current DEA Administrator Terry Cole, Terry and I talk 3 or 4 times a week. He has reshaped the national footprint when it comes to overprescribing and drug cartel and all of these different things. He is just a fabulous leader. I can't say enough about him and the team that he's put in place with the DEA. And we are literally saving lives. Medical based treatment therapy, whether it's methadone, buprenorphine, or Vivitrol, combined with cognitive behavioral therapy and greater access to an opioid antagonist, whether it be Narcan or Cloxato, lives are being saved. And I'm so proud of the work that's being done not only here but across the country in this regard.
Yeah, we all go to various meetings and hear speakers on various subjects. I will say, like hearing you talk about this, it's probably a major county sheriffs of America meeting several years ago, and also hearing Ann, as you mentioned, Ann Milgram, the former DEA administrator. I knew Ann when she was the Attorney General of New Jersey, so I've known her for quite some time. I think you probably had her at one of the major county sheriffs of America meeting. To hear both of you talk about this was so moving, and you could hear your passion in terms of saving lives. I mean, I was moved in the audience hearing both of you speak. So, first of all, congratulations, because I know through your work and others, and I know the current DA administrators carrying a lot of that forward. Uh, many thousands of lives are being saved. Where do you see us go? We know the numbers. The numbers have certainly dropped. Like, what work do you see us needing to do, continuing to go forward to make sure this doesn't rebound back into the epidemic proportions that it has been in the past several years?
Yeah, I can't state enough, having a secure border is incredibly important. And that's not a political statement. I think that for years and years, we saw drugs coming across the southern border, and that has a significant effect. We know that the cartel has shifted to no longer organically process heroin with big poppy fields and all of this, that they've turned to the synthetics. I mean, we've heard the story about precursor chemicals from China. So I think that we now have this
Mm-hmm.
under control. We're intercepting drug traffickers in the southeastern part of the United States that are bringing drugs in by vessel in a way that we've never thought that we would see before. We do have a secure border, but now it's time to also recognize that 80% of the people who have become addicted to heroin were at one time legally prescribed because they believed what the FDA said. And the FDA said when they
Mm-hmm.
approved Oxycontin that with proper use of Oxycontin, the patient is less than 1% likely to become addicted to the substance. So again, in many cases, it's not a situation of trying to make bad people good, but rather sick people well, and it needs to be treated as a medical
Yep.
condition. The most conservative of us should know that if we don't fix what's broken with an individual, we're very likely to raise generations of descendants, because if you're the son or daughter of somebody who's addicted to drugs or incarcerated, you're more than 4 times more likely to engage in maladaptive behavior. So as a fiscal conservative, I don't want to raise generations of family on our tax dollars. I would rather fix the problem, make sure that people are healthy and moving in the right direction. But to answer your question more directly, Mike, the next step is focusing on mental health. Because I think when it comes to policing, there are
Mm-hmm.
three things that are in constant competition for first place. And you've heard us in various venues at the national level talk about this. I am convinced that if you fix mental health, substance use disorder, and an absence of good, solid parenting, you fix those three things, the criminal justice landscape becomes much
Mm-hmm.
easier, and our communities become not only healthier but safer. And I think that doubling down on really doing something of substance when it comes to mental health is the next step that we have to take. You cannot be addicted to a drug and feel like that you will die without it, without having a co-occurring
Mm-hmm.
mental health condition that's going along with it.
Yeah, I just and well said. And I was watching to your one point about good people being prescribed these drugs that by doctors, and they think that they're going to be good for them. I, Not to take us sort of down a different path, but I was just watching a podcast Joe Rogan was doing with the very famous wrestler John Cena. Anybody who loves wrestling knows John Cena, and he described how I don't know, dozens of surgeries he's had and all kinds of repairs have been made to his body because of the wrestling for the WWE. And he said that he still has a drawer full of painkillers because of every time he come out of a surgery, the doctor will be like, hey, or nurse, what is your pain level? And he goes, well, I can like 10, but I'm good with a 10. Like, and they kept just prescribing him painkillers, and he refused to take the painkillers. And he goes, and they both had this conversation, like, because you don't know, and like, if had I taken one, maybe I've down a different path. Like, no one knows what that's going to do to your mind and your body, and the addiction that occurs from there. But they were pushed on everybody at such a level. Like, it's not surprising that we had this epidemic that we had. But I mean, the good news is, and yeah, I think you said it, like, just things around the border, for example, and that's not political, like you said. I think people who are not in the business and don't understand what happens on the streets or happens in your jail, like, if you don't stop it from coming across the border or deal with the precursors coming from China, like, you're gonna still have the problems that we have. So I don't take that statement political at all. I take it as a way that that's one of the key ingredients that has to happen to make sure we continue to make progress on this just incredible problem.
And Mike, you've got policing executives from across the country that listen in and watch your podcast and all, but sadly, many jurisdictions across the country are still treating overdoses as accidental, tragic medical events. And some of the agencies that are actually responding to it and working it as a crime are sending their homicide detectives. And just last week, we had a roundtable at DEA headquarters at the request of DEA Administrator Terry Cole, where we're bringing state, local, municipal law enforcement leaders to the table. And what we say is, if you go to that death case, every one of those death cases are a crime scene. Work it. Do nothing more than
Hmm.
forensically examine the phone of the decedent. One of the five most frequently called numbers is likely going to be the drug dealer, and you may want to send your drug investigators out there in connection with your homicide investigators, and actually to take a deep dive look at this thing. But the WWE is an interesting thing because we have a mayor here in one of the cities in Seminole County that was a former WWE superstar, Matt Morgan, and he talks about his
No way.
addiction and his journey and what was happening on the wrestling circuit. He was an American Gladiator and longtime
Mm.
WWE superstar wrestler, and was really one of the first national names to come out about his own addiction and dependency. And he and I do a lot of talking back here, but I mean, you see it out there, but it's understanding this. And to that point, we worked with former VA Secretary Bob McDonnell when he was on the heels of coming out of office, and I give him a lot of credit because when it came to overprescribing, the VA hospitals, like if there was a
Hmm.
magic medicine that could make people feel more comfortable, well, surely military veterans should be entitled to that type of relief. So what we saw at one point in time was the VA hospitals were doing a lot of the prescribing, overprescribing of OxyContin when they thought it was okay. But he changed the format. He changed the prescribing platform and strategy with VA hospitals. And a lot of the folks that had become addicted were military veterans that had legitimate injuries, not just the Appalachia kind of
Hmm.
down story. There was a lot of people that were
Hmm.
falsely convinced that this was a good recipe for them, and they just become addicted and dependent on it. You take a Tylenol after taking a 60 milligram OxyContin pill. Tylenol is not going to do it for you.
Yeah. Now we're gonna hear about the Army comment. Then I'm gonna hear asking if I'm a wrestling fan. Yes, I am a wrestling fan. I grew up a kid watching WWE and all those stars. Um, and I still do to this day. Like, I am a wrestling fan. Um, you're a sheriff. You're an elected sheriff. We just sort of mentioned taking the politics out of this, what's happening on the border with China. Um, and if you read everything in the media today, it's all about the 287G program and cooperating with ICE. We know on the operational level, there's a lot more cooperation than you may see and hear about sort of in the media. But just curious, though, how do you, as an elected sheriff, stay above the politics? While you're making sure you're protecting your community in the right ways.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike, especially for a sheriff. I'm an elected sheriff. I'm a Republican sheriff. Sheriffs are partisan positions, at least in most states in the country, that they compete in that process. And many people are surprised to learn that when it comes to policing professionals, the sheriff is the only independently elected official that serves in any type of policing capacity. And if you follow our history, even from like the 8th century, where there were surgerifas and then the reeve of the shires, and those positions were very much
Hmm.
positions of the church and the king's court. The bishops would select these individuals, and it ultimately evolved. So we have this unique system. So you can't be 100% absent of politics, because we are in a very much a politically charged position, that the demographics of the county that you represent probably give some
Hmm.
leverage on whether or not you're likely to get elected. But at the same time, Lady Justice is blind. This is when we see her; she's got a mask over her eyes, and the scales of justice should be there. And we are a part of the criminal justice continuum, or in short, Exhibit A on any type of civil or criminal trial should never be my comments as sheriff. I should show an unbiased
Hmm.
position. I tell people all of the time, although I'll go to different political type of venues and I will indeed make endorsements of candidates and do all of these things, I typically round it out with saying, look, for me, I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, not of sound mind or of age to proclaim your political ideology. As sheriff, it is my responsibility to protect all people, not half the people, and we can't fix society's greatest problems with half our population. When I served as major county sheriff's
Hmm.
president, a good percentage of our sheriffs were Democratic sheriffs, good men and women that are very much about law and order. I remember going to one congressional committee and they had me speaking, and one of the new members of Congress said to me at the very beginning, they said, the Democrats don't like the police. And I remember saying pretty boldly, I said, you can't say that. I said, it's just absolutely not true. And
Yep.
and I said,
Yep.
the northeastern policing component is mostly Democratic people that put their bulletproof vests on every single day to go out and serve their community. And in Seminole County, with our
Hmm.
1,400 members of our agency, I've got hundreds of people that are registered Democrats. They're no less public servants and
Hmm.
patriots. They just don't involve themselves in the political kind of environment. Now, I think that you have the very edge of each political party that try to sensationalize this, and this is what gets most of the talking points. But to your question about ICE, partnering with ICE is something that we've always done. There's actually only been like an 8-year period in my 30 plus years that we weren't partnering with them. When I first started working here, it was pretty common for us
Hmm.
to go on operations with ICE and immigration, and if people were here legally, it flies in the face of every person who has gone through the legal process to get here. Or sometimes I put it in layman's terms for people. I said, have you ever been at a concert? Have you ever been at a wrestling show where you wanted to get some merchandise, and you go up to that merchandise counter and there's just a very, very long line? But you know what we do? We're law
Hmm.
abiding, we follow the rules. So we get in that line and we wait and we wait and we wait our turn. Nothing makes you go crazier than to see somebody trying to cut in that line. It will take normally mild mannered people and put them in a position where they're willing to confront somebody. Even if it looks threatening, they'll say, hey, get out of line, get in back. It flies in the face of every person who's trying to do things legitimately. And I think here
Yep.
in the state of Florida, we're leading probably the country, where it doesn't matter if you're a sheriff here. All 67 counties here in the state of Florida have entered into a unique agreement with the 287G program, which provides local municipal police officers the opportunity to work as ICE agents to address some of these things. And I think that
Hmm.
doing it in a sophisticated, balanced approach is the most professional way to do it. We've got fabulous relationships with them here, and I think that the way it's working out here is different than some of the landscapes we've seen in other areas of the country that have over political, made it political and sensationalized things. But it's not just as that. It could be any topic that you talk about. Today, it happens to be immigration.
Yeah. For sure. But I obviously have my friends send me things. They see anything related to policing or criminal justice, whether it's on social media or mainstream media, that about the divide and everything. Obviously, in Minneapolis, an extreme case there. But what I always tell them was encouraging are conversations like this. You're a Republican sheriff. You have to keep your community safe. Your views are not the extreme views you may see on social media because the algorithms drive that. And we just had a convening with the African American Mayors Association and about 25 of their mayors last week. And it was nothing like you might see or hear in the mainstream media or social media. They want for their communities the same thing that you want for your community. They want more police. They want more technology, not less. They just want it done right. And so there might be some differences around the edges of what that means. But I still am encouraged, even when you start to really dig down at the local level, local politics, and then the operational level, what the sheriff's department's doing with the local police department, or state police agency, like there are good people out there trying to do the right things to make their community safe.
And Mike, I think that sometimes we're our worst enemy. I'll give you some examples. Words absolutely matter. So we call ourselves disproportionately law enforcement officers. I don't call us
Yeah.
that. I call us policing professionals. If you listen back to the last 30 minutes we've been talking, policing is the word that I
Hmm.
use more often than not because policing represents something much larger than just simply enforcing. Now, granted, enforcing the law
Hmm.
is a big, important component of what we do. But I can tell you on any given day, the policing agencies and the sheriff's offices across this country are doing a heck of a lot more than policing, which is interesting because when you heard the defund the police movement, the defund the police movement was largely two categories: one larger category, one smaller category. The larger category of people who are advocating for defund the police have simply no idea what we absolutely do on a daily basis. So when they take a
Right on.
tour, when they sit through and they say, "Oh, I didn't realize that you were advocating for diversion programs and mentoring programs and pre-K programs and offering classes and second chance opportunities and problem-solving courts and addiction treatment." And when they hear that, they say, "Okay, I think I feel comfortable now." They just don't know that because we over
Hmm.
sensationalize the arrest and the apprehension. They don't know really about the investment. So once they hear that, most of those people are converted. The other smaller version of the defund the
Yeah.
police are just radically bizarre, dangerously bizarre people who have a warped perception of reality. Citizens should not have to abandon their homes and their businesses to have a criminal element wave move over their city. There has to be law and order.
Hmm.
It's a foundation to our principles and quality of life. It's why government exists in the first place. So,
Yep.
but it gets
Yep.
sensationalized. It gets blown up on various ends of that. You
Yeah.
talk
And
about
by the
that.
way, I'm not saying there aren't.
Well, and think about it. We say use of force. Mike, why do we say use of force?
Hmm.
I say response to resistance. Words absolutely
Yeah.
matter. Every time that using force suggests that maybe I'm doing something to you. Responding to your level of resistance is one more time to clearly articulate what we're actually doing. So you won't hear in the Seminole County Sheriff's Office
Yeah.
us using use of force. It's response to resistance.
Well, the other just triggered me. The other, because words do matter. You're 100% right, and I have to catch myself sometimes not saying law enforcement versus policing, and because I know better. But police killings is another phrase that drives me crazy. When we know 99.9% of all fatal officer involved shootings are justified. So when you use the term police killings, what does that connotate? And what
Yeah.
does that what narrative does that drive? And so that's a term, for example, that sort of I'm passionate about every time I see it. Try to correct the record because that just drives a divide, and it's not true in terms of what's happening out there.
Yeah, and we're not doing it alone, Mike. Like we talked before, so every time we gather for Florida sheriffs or any other state or the police chiefs or IACP or PERF or major county sheriffs of America, we're doing that in harmony with other partners. These are professionals that have created their companies around creating best practice solutions, as we say, and we don't even call them vendors. You remember me and many others saying they have been
Yeah.
great leaders in MCSA. I mean, these are our partners, and if we can do this together, the depth and the relationship to make this job safer, to protect our citizens, to do it in harmony using science and data-driven results is so incredibly important. Or in short, we have to run this like it's a business. And our business is enhancing the
Hmm.
quality of life, reducing crime, all of these things. And it's important that we're looking at whatever metrics we can see and working towards a goal. Like what we do with the partnership,
Yep.
with Axon and other companies, that it's you got to have a goal. Here's what we're shooting for, and we're all working towards the
Hmm.
same thing.
Yep, for sure. And you have been good. You've certainly been good about that. And there are a lot of great companies out there trying to work with public safety agencies to do the right thing as well. Now, Seminole County is also a leader in technology. Just curious, as we start to wrap up here, you know uh, where do you see the field going, or what are the most exciting things you're thinking about in terms of technology and how it can make your agency more efficient, more effective, and your community safer? Like, what are some of the things that are on your mind when it comes to policing and technology?
So when we talk about policing and technology, and again, this isn't about Axon, but you and Rick and Clay and the team at Axon have been just such wonderful partners. Not only with what you've developed, but your willingness to brainstorm with us and create an environment where we're whiteboarding. The crazier idea, the better. Let's just throw some things out. If you could have a pie in the sky, what is going to make our community safer? What is going to minimize the likelihood of being involved in these tragic events? But again, we sometimes are our worst enemy. There's a term that I use around the office a lot, and it's occupationally institutionalized. And people raise their eyebrow and say, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I said, because we get set in norms and decisions and practices simply because that's what we've always done. And if we answer the question honestly, if somebody presented to us, why do you do it this way? The answer more often than not was because the person that did it before me did it exactly like this, and the way that I was trained is to do this. So I think what we have to do is recognize that there'll never be a period in time where there's been so much evolution professionally. When I first started working here, and many people
Hmm.
that are listening to this podcast remembers that first sergeant that we had, that when you would write a report, you weren't allowed to use whiteout. You made one mistake, you ripped up the paper, you had to start writing it again. There was never this idea that I would be, being able to use AI programs and software, and then even with my colleagues, I hear them say, I don't know if I'm going to do that. I'm not going to. I said, I absolutely am going to use it. And I'm going to make sure that there's a human element for checks and balances to be able to do this. But using
Yep.
modern technology, brainstorming solutions, making sure that we have an accurate representation, not only makes the policing profession more of a viable occupational following for a wider audience of people. You think about it, 40 years ago, it was mostly Vietnam veterans that were leaving military service getting into policing. Very few
Hmm.
women were in leadership positions, let alone joining the ranks. You look at how incredibly diverse our organizations are now. With major county sheriffs of America, we have so many good, strong, effective female sheriffs that are creating a path for so many other people, and it's because the intelligence, the patience, the technology that continues to evolve. And you know this. I've had this conversation with you many times over the years. I said, please use us as a test site. Anything that you have in the
Hmm.
works, any company that we partner with, anything that wants to say, you know what, we want to try something new, that's exactly the space that we want to be in. And I think that for most leaders of policing organizations, that's exactly where they want to be. The day of the
Yep.
dinosaur sitting around into the office and saying, you know what, I'm going to accept status quo for the remainder. You can't survive like that any longer. Our citizens have an
Yeah.
expectation to embrace technology, not only for the benefit of our members, but our benefit of the citizens. With Axon's Moonshot Gold isn't just your goal, it's our goal in partnership to reduce police related encounters that result in deadly consequences. This is something that we want to do. We should all want that.
Right on, for sure. Um, Final question, Sheriff, and I ask this of everybody, every guest. Uh, we talked about a lot on the over the past 40 minutes or so. What do you think? What's something on the horizon that you don't think is getting enough attention when it comes to public safety and policing? What is it? Well, it could be a lot of different things, but what do you think we just are not raising to the level that we need to have more conversations about in this
Yeah.
profession?
I think it's two things in this profession, one internal and one external. The internal thing is I think that we have to embrace a concept that people are no longer going to come into this profession as a standard and do 30 to 35 years any longer. I think that our profession, as noble and as honorable as it is, will start to resemble and look more like military service than this
Mm.
lifelong policing occupation. It only makes sense that when we're hiring people with military experience, advanced degrees, sometimes not even in criminal justice or similar disciplines, that we're attracting people from
Mhm.
other occupations. I think it should be okay to say, you know what, I want to serve my community with honor and integrity, but I want to do it for 8 years. And then after that, I want to go off and I want to be a professor. I want to work in the private sector. I want to do
Mhm.
something different. I don't believe that we have prepared ourselves to have nearly 5 times the turnover rate than what we did 30 years ago. I think that most organizations right
Mhm.
now get to the person where they're 10 or 15 years, and then somebody moves on and they're like, man, we got to start from scratch again. When we have embraced that heads on. We've started our own police academy here. We train our own folks, and we have mastered the art of evolution, and have done it with great
Mhm.
support, because if we have more ambassadors that serve 4 or 5 years, move them on.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about the challenge
Yeah.
of the workforce today and not staying the entire time, but I'd never heard it for think about it like military service, whether it's 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, and that could be the new model. And just recognize that that's what it is. Like so, I still give you credit. Like that is,
Yeah.
I've heard the challenge before, but I've never heard the solution like you're describing.
Yeah, Mike, the United States Marine Corps operates by E4s and below. These people that are evolving up, it's a big part of the heart of what the Marine Corps is, and I'm sure the other branches of the armed forces is. And you know what? If they serve honorably and well, they leave, go into their other occupation, and then remain a reservist. So that's one. Second
Hmm.
is our academies across this country, Mike, are incredibly dated. They are still deeply rooted in the 1980s movie Police Academy. And it's looking like kind of military service, and there's still in many cases drill instructors and drill sergeants, and it's yes sir and yes ma'am and all of that, when that's not who we're hiring typically. We're hiring typically people who have demonstrated at least proficiency to get through a battery of interviews that sit before us. We don't need to teach them manners. So I think it will have a more of an
Hmm.
academic leaning. Like if you have a
Hmm.
graduate degree in criminal justice or criminology from a credible institution, do we really think that you're going to learn anything academically in a police academy? Now, high risk, showing proficiency, providing an opportunity to CLEP or Dante classes out. The academies take way too long, and it's more of an indoctrination. And if you're honest, most academies across the country that are not run by the agency who's hiring the person basically tell them, now forget everything they taught you in the academy and let us train you the way that we do business here. So I do think that there's going to be a
Hmm.
modernization of what that looks like. Military, you have a college degree, there's certain aspects of it that you should be able to move right along in and then show proficiency. The thing on the other side is is mental health. The external component that we
Yeah.
need to focus on is mental health. Most law enforcement policing related shootings occur with somebody who's suffering a diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health condition. And we are an incredibly generous society. We know this. If somebody fell at a restaurant that we're at today, a supermarket, they held their knee, they held their chest, we are all going to render aid to the best of our ability. But if we see somebody that suffers a medical condition that occurs from the neck up, we will disproportionately turn our heads and look the other way because we don't feel equipped to deal with
Yeah.
that. If you ask the leaders of these local agencies of how many people within their town, their city, their county have been involuntarily admitted under whatever law they have that allows somebody to be taken into custody that is homicidal or suicidal, I think that the number is incredibly alarming. It's 3,000 here in Seminole County. And we're working on those numbers, but
Yeah.
most leaders wouldn't even have a clue what the number is. I think we have to do more in that space if we want to make our communities safer and preserve the quality of life.
I can't add too much to that other than to say you are 100% right on the mental health issue. And I think I'll admit, like, people just assume I watch a lot of body camera video. I don't watch body camera video hardly at all, because when I watch it, I see so many people who are suffering from a mental health crisis that I don't know the right term, but it makes me sad. Like, like, it's the realities of the world, it's the realities of the job, and those deputies, those officers, those troopers are dealing with it every single day. And I don't think we've equipped them with the right skills or, the right way to handle those situations other than to take them to jail. That's helping anybody. So, I can't. I agree with you on the mental health piece. I'd like to see a lot more conversation around it and a lot more being done, just like we did with the opioid crisis. Like, if we put our minds behind it and we put some effort into it, both locally and nationally, I think we can make some real progress here in the future.
Behind every person that's suffering mental health and on that journey, there's loving family members that cry themselves to sleep at night, wondering, what do I do? Where do I turn? What help can I have?
Well, Sheriff Dennis Lemma, first you can tell your chief of staff, Brian Bear. You didn't say anything that's going to get either one of us into trouble. You behaved yourself, so we'll check that box with Brian. But I just want to say thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your partnership, and thank you for all that you're doing, from your service as a Marine to now what you're doing, working your way up to being a sheriff. You are making a real difference and a real impact. And just want to say thank you and for that. And also thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for having me, and thank you for your leadership. You're a wonderful ambassador and great friend, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.